everyone. Welcome to the January 31st edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we've got a lot of stakes action to look at. We'll begin by handicapping 3 stakes from the Gulfstream Park card on Saturday, including that Derby prep, the Grade 3 Holy Bull. We'll then move on to Aqueduct to discuss a couple of 3-year-old stakes races taking place there this weekend. We'll discuss a minor stakes from Oaklawn Park, and then mention a few of the stakes races on Saturday at Santa Anita. 2 of the races for older horses that are taking place later in that card. But Craig, it's hard to believe that January is almost over. It seems like this time has really flown by. But as we get into February, that means that the Derby preps are really going to kick into high gear. We're not going to talk about all of them, but what's your sort of top line take on your excitement level for seeing some of these big horses returning this weekend?
I like it. Not so much. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the Kentucky Derby, but I just love betting these races. I think they're real challenges. And let's not forget, as long as January seemed, February is going to seem even longer, being 29 days this year. So, just got to keep people apprised that it is a leap year. But yeah, I love betting these races. I certainly study them for how it's going to turn out for some horses as they progress through the Derby. But these early ones, I don't take them too seriously as far as that goes, because it's just too soon. But from a betting perspective, I love them because I think there's a lot of overbet horses and a lot of valuable opportunities out there.
Yeah, and especially this year, it doesn't feel like there's quite the drama that's been built up for some of these races yet, because the picture is so muddled. We don't know who the leading contenders are. I mean, you could say that 1,000 Words and 'Tis the Law are 2 of the best prospects out there, and I don't think too many people would argue with that. But their positions are not solidified yet, so I think they all still have a lot to prove. And with that, let's jump right into some of those 3-year-old stakes races. And we'll begin at Gulfstream Park. And while it's not a race that's awarding Kentucky Derby qualifying points, they are running the Swale, going 7 furlongs, a Grade 3 event. And there are some intriguing runners in this race that could eventually make it onto the Derby trail, although we'll see if their connections decide to stretch them out. But there is quite a bit of quality in this race. The 2 horses that are likely to take the most money are Untitled, that impressive maiden winner from last time out, and Green Light Go, who was one of the most exciting 2-year-olds from last summer at Saratoga. Both of these horses are comfortable with sprint distances. I think it's just a matter of which one's going to step up.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to go a little bit different direction in here. I respect both of those horses. Are certainly good. I think Green Light Go is probably going to wind up going off close to odds on, I would think. Maybe 6-5, 7-5. So maybe not quite odds on. So I'm going to take a stand against him. It wouldn't shock me if he wins this race and runs well. But despite winning, he didn't run particularly fast. He ran fast enough for 2-year-olds at that time of year, but nothing to blow you off the page. And you have to wonder if this is a real target for him or if it's just kind of a race to get back going. So I kind of look toward the inside at the 2 horses there who were coming off of maiden wins, and Mischievous Alex, who actually he came off a stakes win, and Untitled, who was coming off that big maiden win, who have both run much faster than Green Light Go has. And for me, it came down to those couple of figures. Untitled got a 117 from us, but I have to be honest, I'm a little leery of that speed figure. It was a very tough one to make. There wasn't a lot of data that day. A couple horses, I believe, have run back from it. And while the runner-up did win, he ran slower than he was given on the day of Untitled's win. Whereas Mischievous, I'm really struggling with that word, Mischievous. I believe they spelled it wrong as well.
At least they don't have to spell it, I was going to say.
Right. I believe that they spelled it not the way you would spell mischievous, but Mischievous Alex was a horse who really impressed me at Parks for service. He tried blinkers for the first time. He broke like a shot. He ran a 114, and what I really like about that race is it's proven to be a strong race. I looked through our chart, and I think there's 4 horses who have come out of the race to win either the very next time out or the time after that. So within 2 races, they've all run similar speed figures to what they ran that day. So I just have a lot more faith in that figure. And I also think the jump up was no fluke. He was a horse who looked promising from the debut. He won first time out. He's always been pretty heavily bet, and he disappointed for a while, but the addition of blinkers really seemed to shake him up and do the right thing. So I think he's a horse who's probably going to be quite a bit closer than our pace projector shows him. He's rated from, using the races without blinkers. There's a turf race thrown in. But if you just look at his last race and think he can repeat it, I think he's going to be really tough and offer a little more value.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add about what you said regarding Untitled's debut win. Obviously, it was visually impressive, and he absolutely trounced that field. I agree with your assessment of the speed figure, but what I'll say is that even if the speed figure turns out to be 10 points too high, a number of 107 on our speed figure scale would still make him a major contender in this race. He would just have to step up and do it against tougher company. So I'm not totally against Untitled. I just didn't see him offering a ton of value in this race. They've got to put some stallion caps on those Into Mischiefs because there is just too many of them. We can't pronounce the names. But Mischievous Alex, they spell it mischievous, which I don't think is a real word. But I agree. His last race was impressive. My one issue with him is that his two big performances have come at parks. And I don't always trust horses that run these big speed figures at parks and haven't translated them to other racetracks to bring them to a new racetrack all the time. He's obviously been based at parks going back to last year as a trainee of John Service. So we'll see what we get from him. I agree. The last speed figure looks legitimately fast. I just want to see him duplicated at a different venue. I'm a fan of Greenlight Go. My one concern with Greenlight Go is that he was such a developed, mature 2-year-old going all the way back to last July. I mean, just watching his races, you could see that he was bigger and stronger than all of the horses he was running against. And I wonder if sometimes like that, 6 months, 8 months down the line, if all of his peers have caught up with him. He seems to be trading well for this race, so I would definitely use him. But I wanted to go in a slightly different direction, too, and my alternative is the number 6 Necker Island. Just thought he looked like a horse that could fall into the right trip in this race. If Mischievous Alex goes from the rail, if Untitled is aggressively ridden again, and Greenlight Go's not going to be that far off the pace, Necker Island's not the kind of closer that has to come from way back. He'll be in a stalking position too, but I don't mind him turning back to the 7 furlongs after going the mile last time. That came up as a pretty strong allowance race, and Silver State returned to be a decent second in a Lecomte next time out. And it just seems like Stanley Huff, I know he hasn't had a winner yet at Gulfstream at this championship meet, as they call it, but his runners always seem to do well. So I think this horse might just work out the right trip.
Yeah, I have no problem with him. He should certainly almost fall into a good trip by default. There is some question to me if he can actually close. He's never really made up ground late, but, you know, these are young, lately raced horses. And even though we have them labeled as a speed horse, sometimes they just fall into the trip when there's faster horses in them. And we find out they can actually make up some ground. He's never really had to do it. So that is a little bit of a question mark for me with him, but I don't have any major knocks on him.
Let's stick with the 3-year-olds and move on to the turf to discuss the Dania Beach, the race that'll be run right between this Swale and the Holy Bull at Gulfstream Park on Saturday. And this race drew a pretty intriguing field of runners. Likely, it's hard to know who the likely favorite's going to be. I think Homeland is the favorite on the morning line. He is a New York bred that ran against Open Company at Aqueduct last time in that Central Park Stakes, making a late run. He's a $500,000 son of American Pharaoh, so obviously there are some things to like about him. But I thought this was a pretty wide open field. Where did you go in here? Who did you like?
Yeah, speed figures certainly tend to point to that. There is a lot of horses who you could go with in here. If I had to come up with a top choice, I actually wound up with Famish, the 9 horse. There was a lot I liked about his race back in the Pilgrim. I think he's a horse who probably is going to wind up preferring turf. They tried him on dirt a couple times. He did break his maiden on dirt, but I liked his turf race. He got a 98 TimeformUS speed figure, which is competitive with this group right now, and that came back in September. He did it against a horse who went on to win the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Instructor. And I mean, I don't love him, but if you force me to make a top pick and what's a wide open race, I'd probably come up with him. And getting Irad Ortiz aboard to ride certainly is a plus in this kind of race.
Yeah, I've got no problem with Famish. That 6-1 in the morning line to me seems like nothing more than a dream, because I could see him even going off favorite in this race. He just makes a lot of sense. I mean, he ran so well in that Pilgrim Stakes last year, and as you said, that race has turned out to be pretty strong. So I like Famished here too. Though if I had to make a top pick, I would go instead to the recent maiden winner Miaminoy for Danny Gargan. This horse, I think, it might be a little better than he looks, because he also ran against Structor when Structor broke his maiden at Saratoga last summer. That was a race that just featured no pace at all, and Miaminoy was caught at the back of the pack and just really had no chance to make any impact that day because they sprinted home, and you just can't make up ground in that situation. He was off for a while after that. I didn't love that they entered him in a variety of spots and scratched him. I think they even entered him for a tag one time, but I'm hoping they were just wrong about all of that, because they put him back in the maiden special weight when he finally reappeared at Aqueduct in December. And that was a pretty impressive victory. He was behind the pace early. Eric Consell allowed him to make a middle move down the backstretch, passing almost the entire field from about the 5/8 pole to the 3/8 pole. And usually when horses make really early moves like that, they can't sustain them. But once they got into the stretch, he continued to widen. The speed figure came back strong. Don't know what was behind him, but I don't care that much because he won so decisively. And this horse has the pedigree to be really nice. On the dam side, I know it's a pretty obscure pedigree, but the dam's a half to King Kamehameha, who was one of the most influential sires in Japan over the past 20 years. So I feel like this one is cut out to be a really nice turf horse, and hopefully he can take the next step forward here.
Yeah, I've got no issues with him. The only skepticism I would have is that his race was over the Aqueduct turf course last time. He did get a nice speed figure that day, a 104, which is as good as anyone in here. But much like you mentioned with Parks, with Mischievous Alex, it seems to me Aqueduct oftentimes can be a horse for turf course. I've seen countless horses that seem to run well at Aqueduct and don't transfer it elsewhere, and vice versa. I'm not saying that's the case with him. We really don't know, but that would be my one concern. The other horse I would want to give a look to in here is Get Smokin', the 10 horse, just on the fact that he has good speed figures and he looks like he's going to be clear on the lead, which is never a bad thing at Gulfstream Park. I haven't checked on this particular race yet to see where the rail is going to be and what kind of run up we're going to have for that race, and that could alter my thinking, but this is not your typical turf course at Gulfstream. Speed is certainly an asset here.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I also agree with your assessment of those Aqueduct turf performances not always being that reliable. I look at it as more of a negative with a horse like Homeland, who's going to be a short price in this race. And he ran well in that Central Park last time. I was surprised that the field was so bunched at the wire. I thought there were a lot of conservative rides that day. Pixelate seemed like a better horse than those to me. And I think maybe he just didn't love the turf course that day, and others might have. So we'll see how that race turns out or comes back as these horses run out of it. But I didn't love Homeland as the potential favorite in this race. So we'll see how those Aqueduct horses come back and do in their subsequent starts. Let's wrap things up at Gulfstream by talking about that Derby prep that we mentioned at the top, the Grade 3 Holy Bull, awarding, I believe, 10 qualifying points to the winner of this race. And it features one of the top early Derby prospects, that being Tiz the Law. There are many of those out there, so it's not like he's alone in having that status. But Tiz the Law was one of the more impressive two-year-olds that we saw last year, making that dazzling debut at Saratoga and then backing it up with that score in the Champagne over Green Light Go. He disappointed in the Kentucky Jockey Club last time. How much does that race make you concerned about his ability to get two turns, and do you think he's vulnerable here?
I do. I'm going to bet it like he's vulnerable. I could very well be wrong. Maybe it was a sloppy track last time. He definitely had a bit of a tough trip. He was ridden a little too conservatively. I think he got stuck in behind horses. He didn't appear to like it very much. But the one thing that did concern me is he did get clear at a point in the stretch and looked like he was going to win the race. And he just didn't have it. He did not only win, he didn't get second either. So, you know, he definitely had some excuses between the surface, the trip, but I don't know that you want to count on that with a 3-5 favorite on the morning line, which means he could be even lower by the time this goes off. So I looked in a couple different directions in here, and I wound up landing on a couple horses from the same race, that allowance race back in December, and that would be the race was Ete Indian, I think is how I heard Pete say it during the call, and Toledo, the Chad Brown runner, and I was actually impressed by both of these two. I liked how the winner that day, the Ete Indian, was able to, he was getting a tough trip from the inside. He was kind of battling for the lead, but he wasn't quite up there. And he just plowed his way through, got clear. And what impressed me most is how when he was challenged, it looked like Toledo was going to run by him in the stretch. He just dug in and was able to hold him off. And now we're trying two turns for sure. It's a different animal, but they use a different finish line for these mile and a 16th races. And I think horses with early speed on the inside definitely have a bit of an advantage. And he's a horse who's quick and could be up there on the lead. So I like him him just as much as I like Tiz the Law, and I even like Toledo some. I mean, he's still a lightly raced horse. He's progressing, run better speed figures every time. He's trained by Chad Brown and ridden by Red Ortiz. So, if you get a hot pace, he's going to get the right trip and be coming late. So I prefer those two to the 3-5 favorite.
I'm not going to knock you taking a shot against a heavy favorite here. I normally would be inclined to do that. I'm personally not going to try to beat Tiz the Law in this race. For my money, I can make enough excuses for his Kentucky Jockey Club last time that I would expect him to run a lot better this day. I thought that performance last time was primarily due to rider error, just getting a little too cute with a horse that was the best horse that day, putting him in that pocket. The thing about Tiz the Law is he gets very keen early in his races and he wants to run up there. And the multiple times that he tried to do that around the far turn of the Kentucky Jockey Club, there was just nowhere to go. And he never got a chance to unleash that brilliant turn of foot that we saw in the Champagne because he kept getting stopped and having to start again. So just given what I saw in the Kentucky Jockey Club, I'm going to give him a pass for that race. And also, it's not like that field was easier than this one. I mean, horses like Silver Prospect and Enforceable arguably are better than some of the rivals he's facing here. So I'm willing to give Tiz the Law a pass, even though he's going to be a short price this day. I don't know what to make of the horses coming out of that Toledo Ete Indian race. Ete Indian in particular is a really confusing one for me to assess because I look at his pedigree and it seems more turfy, and he took to turf so well in his debut, didn't get the right trip or was just overmatched in the Bourbon two-back. I don't know what to make of that allowance race last time. There were some things about it I liked, the fact that he survived that honest pace. There were some things about it I really didn't like, that he never changed leads and that he was drifting out really badly through the stretch. I don't love to see those things with a horse that's going to be stretching out and trying two turns for the first time. Toledo, I thought Red Ortiz was a little overconfident that day, sort of putting him in an awkward spot down the back stretch, having to move around horses on the far turn. And the fact that he basically didn't ride the horse for the final 16th of a mile was almost like him saying, all right, I gave up. I messed up the prep race, but this is not the target. Next time is the target. So I would expect Toledo to run better here. Before we move on, though, I want to get your take on the pace of this race because the pace projector to me is a little confusing. I'm not going to be surprised if Relentless Dancer goes out, but I would expect Paco Lopez to send a horse like Clear Destination, who's got real sprint speed. I think he's just not shown up close to the pace because we're not calculating or factoring in the races where he showed the most speed, like 4 and 5 races back.
Well, we take the fastest, the 3 fastest. The thing that's putting him further back, there's a couple things, really. One, he's never run on dirt and pace it. Well, he hasn't run on dirt in his last 5 races. I think he did in the beginning of his career. But he hasn't run in the ones that we're looking at for the pace projector. And the paces just aren't as quick on synthetic and on turf. He's been involved in some races where the pace is slow. They're coated in blue. One of his races was a route race. It was a 7.5 furlongs, but we count those as routes since they are 2-turn races on turf pretty much everywhere, I think, even on that inner turf course at Woodbine. So I don't disagree that he could be closer up, but I understand why the pace projector has him further back. He just hasn't run fractions that are on our adjusted fractions fast enough to put him up closer. That doesn't mean he can't, and with a right rider like Paco Lopez, I'm sure he'll certainly try.
Yeah, I just found it interesting. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. I just see a ton of speed in this race, but it's hard to know who's really going to take initiative and go to the front because it seems like there are a lot of different ways this could play out. And maybe that ultimately does help Tiz the Law, who probably wants a slightly faster pace than he got last time. Let's stick with those Derby preps and move up to Aqueduct to discuss the Grade 3 Withers, which is also being run on Saturday. This will be the longest Derby prep that we've seen so far in 2020, the longest run that they're running this weekend, going 1 1/8 miles, making it a real test of stamina for these horses. One horse that already has handled the 1 1/8 miles distance, though, is Shotsky, the morning line favorite, who handled this distance when he won the Remsen back in December. What do you make of that Remsen score? Because I know there was a lot of talk about track bias that day and the pace of that race. Did everything just kind of come together for him? And is this going to be a more difficult spot?
I think it is a more difficult spot. I think he kind of fell into a good trip that day, but I don't want to underrate his performance. I mean, I thought he ran well. He got a 1:11 TimeformUS speed figure. He did look like he was gasping a little bit towards the end. I do think the track favored speed at least somewhat that day. Maybe not quite as much as our bright red in the race rating box makes it look like, but I certainly think it was more of an advantage than on a normal day. So while I do think he's a contender in here, there is a lot more speed than we saw that day. We have a couple sprinters stretching out. We have some speed horses shipping in, and Monday Morning Quarterback is one of them. New commissions coming out of a bunch of sprint races. They all have good speed figures. So I personally agree with the pace projector here. I think it is going to be a fast pace and probably set up for somebody coming off of it. And I had a really hard time trying to figure out who was the horse that was going to be. I was a little disappointed when I first looked at this race. There wasn't a morning line here. And the horse I eventually landed on was Max Player. I'm not disagreeing with your morning line. You're probably right. I was being a bit optimistic he would be higher than the 9-2 you pegged him at. But he's a horse who hasn't run particularly good speed figures, but I really like what I've seen from him for Linda Rice. I was really impressed with his last race, where over a sloppy track, he was able to overcome a really slow pace and just blow away what was a fairly decent field. When I look back in the chart, it was a pretty strong maiden race. So I think this is a pretty open race, but I'm going to take a shot against Shotsky.
Yeah, we have a very similar opinion here. I agree. Shotsky ran well in the Remsen. I do think there were some things working in his favor. I'm not going to be shocked if he does well in this race, because it's not like he's some need the lead runner. I think he can stalk the pace. And I concur with your assessment that there is quite a bit of speed in here. A horse like Monday Morning Quarterback does really have to go from the rail. And even Mr. Short and Simple to his inside, I imagine they're going to try to send him too, even though he doesn't look that fast. So there could be some hitting up front. Maybe that negatively affects Shotsky. And I was looking at some of those recent maiden winners. I also have landed on Max Player, and it's funny, when I was making the morning line for this race, I think I originally had him at like 8-1. And as you consider things more and more and looking at it from different angles, I just kept making him lower and lower, because I think there are a lot of reasons to like this horse, and I foresaw a lot of people landing on this horse. We'll see how they ultimately bet the race. I like both of Max Player's races at Parks. He was really green first time out, just kind of lost contact with the field, and his rider just kept after him throughout the race. And I always like to see when first-time starters continue to respond to that encouragement. And he really was picking up the best momentum by the finish of that race and was running out past the winner after the wire. And second time out, Linda Rice put the blinkers on. He was way more in the bridle, still super green. And his rider was having to ride him quite a bit down the backstretch to keep him in the race. But he was going there for his jockey. And once they got to the top of the stretch, he was already on top of the leaders and finished it off really strongly. He's not supposed to have trouble with more distance. There's route pedigree on the dam side. He does have to run much faster, but if the pace materializes the way that I think it's going to, he figures to work out the right trip. And I also think it's meaningful that Linda Rice is even running in this race, because we know with Linda Rice, she's not the kind of trainer that's just going to take a shot with any horse in a graded stakes race. She always takes the path of least resistance. So the fact that she's bringing a horse from a maiden race right into this stakes is pretty meaningful to me.
Yeah, nothing else to add about that horse. You pretty much summed up the points that I missed as well. The horse I did want to ask you about is Portos. He's the one that gave me a little bit of trouble. His win last out, the maiden race, was really impressive. He got a 109 speed figure, but it did come over a sloppy track. He drew away. Now, it wasn't one of those wire-to-wire where he just takes the lead. He did rate off the pace, and it looks like it was a pretty decent race. Cowtown, the runner-ups, come back to run okay, but he's one I'm not not sure what to make of. And you have him at 3-1 on the morning line, which is second choice. So I don't know if he's going to offer a whole lot of value, but I'm just looking to see, what do you think about its last race?
Yeah, Portos to me feels like a horse that's going to be overbetting here. He can totally win. Obviously, they wanted him to go this 1.125 distance right from the start, because they debuted him going 9 furlongs at Saratoga last summer. He wants to run all day. He's probably the kind of horse where they have the Belmont Stakes in the back of their minds. But I don't love any of his races. I know he was visually impressive in the slop last time. That was not a good field. Cowtown, his stablemate, was second. He came back and ran okay in another pretty weak maiden race at Aqueduct, but it was also in the slop. And furthermore, it seemed like he was more effective when he got to be up closer to some slow paces in his last two starts. And this time, he's going to have to close from much further back in the pack. Maybe he does it, and maybe that even helps him. But I just think it's interesting that he's come alive when he's been able to race closer to the pace, and now he's going to have to adjust that style again. I think he can win this race. In some ways, he might be the second most likely winner. Just feels like I think it's going to be a pretty short price, maybe even close to Shotsky's price, and I just wanted some more value.
Thanks. That's good. The one thing he does have, this is the third time he's running a mile and an eighth. You don't often see that for horses this young.
No, I mean, if anything, this distance might be short for him, and I guess we'll find that out in coming months. We'll stick at this mile and an eighth distance at Aqueduct and talk about a race from Sunday's card. It's the 3-year-old filly counterpart of the Withers. That's the Busanda. And I just thought this was a pretty interesting race of horses that we've already seen on the New York circuit, mostly in maiden races. Some of them have raced against each other in those maiden races and are stepping up into stakes company here. Just thought there were a lot of contenders in this race. The horse to beat maybe is Harvey's Little Goyle, because she got on the dirt first time in her second start last time, and was visually impressive. She ran deceptively well in her turf debut, but seems like she might really be more of a dirt horse based on the last race.
Yeah, this is a really tough race. Just looking at our preview page, basically all of the horses have run speed figures. I think it's between right around 95 and 100. You don't often see that in a 7-horse field. The Timeform US pace projector does have it as being a race without a whole lot of speed. We have the 3 Quality Heat and the 4 Persisto right up on the front together, but I don't think either one of those two are particularly need the lead types. Persisto, he won last time, but it was a really slow pace. So I think it's going to be a really tactical race. I'm not sure what to make of it. I wish I could say I had a really strong opinion in here, but I don't. Water White, who ran into Demoiselle last time, and I think is the second choice on the morning line and has the best speed figure. I'm really not sure what to make of her. I guess you can give her an excuse, particularly if you thought the track was speed favoring that day, as we have it coded. She was wide, but I'm not sure how much value she's going to offer. So to be honest, this is probably one I'm going to pass. If I play horizontals, I'm going to spread in it because I don't really have a strong opinion on anyone.
Yeah, it's not a race where I have a really strong opinion either. It's just one that I wanted to talk about because I think there are a lot of different ways you could go. I do have a lot of respect for Harvey's Little Goyle. Even if she is the favorite in this race, I think she is the horse to beat. She's got a nice pedigree by American Pharaoh. The Dam by Tappet is actually a half-sister to I'll Have Another, and Golden Award, who's an older filly who's been posting some big speed figures and routes for Bill Mott. So she just seems like a horse that's going to love the mile and an eighth distance. I really liked her maiden breaking score last time. So to me, she's the horse to beat. I like Water White maybe a little more than you do. I didn't think she got the best trip in the Demoiselle. More than that, I thought maybe Manny Franco made the wrong choice coming out of the gate because she actually broke a length ahead of the eventual winner, Lake Avenue, and it just seemed like they had made the decision before the break to take her back and didn't play the break, even though she was breaking from the number 9 post position to try to get over and save some ground. And she ended up going wide around both turns, and just don't think that was ideal for her. So she might be able to do better here. The other horse that I would consider at a price, if maybe not to win the race, but to get into the mix, is the number 2 Ankle Monitor coming up from Laurel. I know she's been facing some weaker foes, but her speed figures actually put her right in the mix. And she seems like the kind of grinder that will get this mile and an eighth distance without any problem. Maybe the pace doesn't work out for her, but she just feels like one that could pick up pieces late at a big price.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't really have any knocks on Water White. She would be my second choice behind Harvey's Little Goyle. The Harvey's Little Goyle, as we've talked about Persisto, she came back out of that race to run second. So I don't really have any knocks. I just wasn't able to come up with any value. If you think Ankle Monitor's it, I don't have any problem with her. The Laurel circuit is just getting stronger and stronger. I think people over the years, there was a time when Maryland racing was down quite a bit, and you could pretty much toss their shippers out. But I think those times are changing, and you do have to kind of keep an eye on them because when they come in with speed figures that are competitive, they're legit and they can compete.
I totally agree with that. The fields have gotten a lot stronger, more competitive, especially once you get into the spring, summer, and fall months. Even their turf races are really competitive. Yeah, I don't cast aspersions on the Maryland form as much as I used to these days. Let's stick with the fillies and mares, but of the older variety, as we'll move down to Oaklawn Park to discuss the American Beauty Stakes going 6 furlongs. And this race features the return of one of the quickest fillies in the division, that being Amy's Challenge, who we saw in some Grade 1 events last year. Hasn't raced since the Humana Distaff on Derby Day, coming back in this listed stakes race. Oaklawn is her stomping ground. She loves the 6 furlong distance. Feels like she's going to be pretty tough to beat, right?
Yeah, I think she is going to be personally. I wish I could beat her. As people who listen to the show know, I'm generally trying to find a way to beat the favorite. But the thing that caught my eye with her is she's a horse who comes off the bench ready to roll. She started her career with 2 wins, and she had a short layoff. Then she came off the bench with another win, tailed off a little bit, laid off, came off the bench, won again, tailed off, came off the bench, won again. So that seems to be the MO with her. She kind of comes out sharp. She's fast. She runs good races. And then her form tails off and they rest her. And it looks like that's what happened here. Now, granted, this is the longest layoff she's ever had. So maybe she had a more serious injury, or something that set her back more than normal. But for me, it's hard to overlook that. This just seems to be the MO with her to strike off the bench. She runs her best races. As long as she holds form, they'll keep her going. So her speed figures make her, if she's herself, she's going to win the race.
Yeah, it really seems that way. If she's ready to roll, I don't think anybody in here can beat her. If she's not ready to go, I mean, I guess the logical alternative is Irish Mischief. She's one that feels like she might take a lot of money as the clear second choice in this race, and maybe it's deserved. She ran pretty well in the Raven Run last time, or 2 back. Last time out, she wasn't beating much at Churchill Downs, but I guess she did it well enough. If I was going to take an alternative, though, I'd want to go for a slightly bigger price with the number 5 Special Relativity. Just don't think she really wanted to go the mile last time. I know she's coming back on just 1 week's rest, but hopefully she can handle that because she's raced quite frequently in the past, even though she hasn't run 2 races a week apart. But 6 furlongs rather seems like it's a much better distance for her, and she's earned some speed figures that put her in the mix at least with Irish Mischief, and she'll be a much better price. So if I was going to play exactas here, trying to use a backup, it would be Special Relativity.
Yeah, we're in the same boat there. I was going to say the exact same thing. If I were playing exactas, I would go away from Irish Mischief just because you don't want a favorite over the second choice. And I think the turnback is great for Special Relativity. And she actually ran pretty well going along from a speed figure perspective. She ran second to Woe Nelly, who, won that stakes race. I am a little concerned about the turnaround. I mean, that was just last Saturday. So it'll be interesting to see if she actually does show up and run in this race and not scratch. But if she does, I've always found that's a good sign when it's a quick turnaround like this.
Yeah, I don't mind it that much either, especially with barns that do it often. I don't think Robertino Teodoro does, but hopefully it works out for her. Let's finish things up at Santa Anita, and we're not going to go into an in-depth discussion of the third Derby prep, the Robert B. Lewis. I assume you're not trying to beat 1,000 Words there, who looks like the heavy favorite.
No, I'm not. I think it comes down to the 2 Baffert horses, and the more I watch the last race, I see nothing that would make me think he could turn that high velocity could turn the tables on him. There's a couple horses who are moving in off of turf races and Encoder and Royal Act, but just looking at the breeding and the past performances, it just feels more like taking a shot because they're 3-year-olds and the big races are on dirt this time of year than it does thinking they really want that surface.
Yeah, I won't go into a dissertation on it. I did a segment about this race on the DRF video page, and you can watch it if you want to. I picked it against 1,000 Words with Tis a Magician. Just thought he was an interesting up-and-comer for Jerry Hollendorfer. I won't go into all the reasons now, because I think that the other 2 races that we're going to discuss at Santa Anita are just better wagering affairs, those being the San Marcos and the San Pasqual. Let's begin with that turf race, the San Marcos, going 1.25 miles, a Grade 2 event, and only 6 horses because Campaign will be scratching out of here. United is going to be the favorite, based primarily off his effort 2 back when he ran bricks and mortar to that head decision in the Breeders' Cup Turf. He lost as the favorite last time in the Hollywood Turf Cup, but I think you can make a lot of excuses for that race. He is the horse to beat, but how much margin for error do you think he has here?
He doesn't have much. It's a lot of the same horses he's been seeing in Cleopatra Strike and Oscar Dominguez. Multiplier ships in from the east, I guess. He looks like he's in a Peter Miller barn now. So maybe if you can expect some improvement from him, he could run well. He's actually the horse I will probably wind up playing just based on the barn change. He's had some past success, and also the fact that there's not a whole lot of speed in here. And given his last race on dirt, I wouldn't be shocked if this horse finds himself on an easy lead. But I don't love anybody in here, but I just can't find myself taking a short price because these horses seem to always take turns beating each other. Cleopatra Strike is a horse who doesn't like to win. He almost always runs well. He runs good speed figures, but it's almost like he lucks out when he actually wins. He just happens to make the lead at the right time. He's a real tricky horse. So whenever I see groups like this, it just always take turns beating each other. I'm always drawn to horses who haven't been competing against them.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the thinking with the horse like Multiplier, and given the pace projector, there is a path to victory for him. He wasn't for me personally. I just don't think he's in good form right now. But I mean, these trainer switches to Peter Miller are always dangerous. So I wouldn't write anybody off in this race, and he might be the biggest price of them all. Though for me, it's interesting that the other 5 horses in this race, excluding Multiplier, are all coming out of that Hollywood Turf Cup. So for me, when you've got 5 of the 6 horses all exiting one race, it's like a trip handicapper's feast to just look at all the trips and determine who ran the best. United probably did run the best race because he lost so much ground that day, whereas Oscar Dominguez got to save ground, and there was a pretty honest pace up front that set it up for Oscar Dominguez's late run. So I don't want Oscar Dominguez out of that race. I would much rather take United, but there were other horses in that race that had slightly more trouble. One of those is not Cleopatra Strike, who got there and just couldn't seal the deal, and that just seems to be his MO. He gets a piece of it, but rarely wins races. The horse that interests me most out of that Hollywood Turf Cup is the number 5 Brown Storm. He just got a really confusing ride that day. They sent him to the lead. He looked like he was going to secure the front end going around that first of 3 turns. And then his rider let him drop back a little bit into a pocket behind the leaders. That seemed like a good position for a while, but then as they were coming around the far turn, the horse that was on the lead on the rail just started backing up abruptly, and Brown Storm, even though he had a ton of horse, got shuffled all the way back to last place by the quarter pole. And I think it's a real credit that once he got into the clear again in the stretch, he re-rallied to get back into 6th and was even closing on today's rival Chosen Vessel at the end to get a piece of this for 4th. So Brown Storm just didn't have a chance to show what he could really do that day, but I was encouraged by the early speed that he showed, and given his position on the pace projector, I'm not going to be surprised who takes the lead, and it's really going to be a rider's race. Won't be shocked if he's in front of these early, and maybe that gives him an advantage because, as we were saying at the top, I think this field is a lot more evenly matched than the wagering might indicate.
Yeah, and he's actually the horse I have listed second as the one I like, and some of it's because of the speed, but I put a line through his last race due to that same trip that you said. And I'll be honest, as a bettor in horizontal bets in a race like this is the kind of race where I'll just use horses like the 3 and the 5 and know that if I'm correct, there's going to be a whole bunch of tickets eliminated where I'm still alive. And now, granted, you have to get the winner. You're throwing out a lot of short price favorites, but in the end, it's a strategy I like that's paid off for me quite a few times. Kind of a separator race where I don't like the short prices, so I just take a shot, and it lets you be able to spread more in some of the other races.
Yeah, I think that's a really good strategy in a race like that, where you can make a case for a lot of them. You can't use them all because there are only 6 runners, so you do have to take a stand somewhere. And maybe you could spread more in a race like the San Pasqual, which is a 10-horse field and seems just as confusing as the race we just discussed. We've got a few horses coming out of that San Antonio, which was won by Gift Box. The big disappointment in that race was Midcourt, who broke a little bit slowly, just seemed like he was a little sluggish going past the stands for the first time. It took Victor Espinoza a lot of encouraging to get this horse into the race. I didn't love that effort because he never really was competitive, although I guess he was closing decently at the end. He's the slight favorite on the morning line, but there are many ways you could go in this race, and I wouldn't want to take too short of a price on anybody.
No, I would agree with that. I don't want any parts of Midcourt. He was on a winning streak coming into that race. He looked like he should at least be able to challenge Gift Box that day, but he never did. And it just looked like a race to me where he really didn't have an excuse, and maybe he's all form. And I always look to take advantage of horses like that because they'll usually get bet for another race or two. Now, maybe I'm wrong and he'll revert and run back to his big race, but that generally doesn't happen, in my opinion. Usually when they throw, there is a reason, and it'll show itself eventually. That said, it's still not a very easy race to pick. You have a horse like Roadster in here, who's almost assuredly going to get bet just because it's a Bob Baffert trainee. He won the Santa Anita Derby as a 3-year-old. And there's nothing really wrong with his races this year. He hasn't run great, but he hasn't run bad. He got a 117 when running second to Omaha Beach, who unfortunately had to scratch out of the Pegasus. So we don't have a lot to go on there. But personally, I think he is the horse to beat over a horse like Midcourt.
Yeah, I don't know who the horse to beat is. It's really hard to say. I'm personally not a big fan of Roadster. I never have been. I never really got the hype around him. I guess he ran fine in the Santa Anita Derby. I just haven't loved his other races. He was okay in the Malibu last time. I don't know how much running anybody really did behind Omaha Beach. So, all right. I've never thought he wants to go a mile on an eighth either. I always think Roadster is more of a 7 furlong to a mile kind of horse, even though he did win that Santa Anita Derby. So Roadster is just never going to be for me in races like this. In my opinion, maybe the most likely winner by a slim margin is King Abner. I know he's had a lot more chances than the rest, but he just seems to be in really good form right now. He took a real shot at Gift Box last time, challenged him coming to the quarter pole, eventually got turned away, but I thought it was a really encouraging effort. And if he repeats that 124 TimeformUS speed figure, I think everybody else is going to have to step up and beat him. So if he's anywhere near that 4-1, I think that's a pretty solid price on King Abner.
Yeah, I probably misspoke a little. Roadster's the horse to beat, but I'm trying to beat him. And we actually landed on the same horse here in King Abner. I don't think the speed figure he ran last time out was a fluke by any means. He's a horse who had run in the 120s before, and he seems to be in good form. So I do have him listed as my top pick. And the other horse I'm actually giving a look to is 235, the 8 horse. He comes out of that race a couple back that Midcourt won pretty easily. But like I said, I don't think we're seeing the same Midcourt here. And I just think he's a solid runner who's going to be mid-pack. He should get some pace. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's in a good position to strike in the lane. So while he's not my second pick, or not my top pick, I will be using him in my horizontal bets as well.
So, yeah, I wouldn't say that King Abner is my top pick. We keep misreading each other. But, I do think King Abner is the most likely winner. I don't have a problem with you taking a little bit of a shot with 235. For me, the other horse that I'd want to use, and the horse that I'm going to say is my top pick, because he's just a bomb in this race and he's a little ridiculous, is the number 2 Route 66. If you go back to last summer at Santa Anita, this horse was running races that were just as good, if not better, than King Abner. He was really getting on a roll in March and April and June. Running some TimeformUS speed figures in the high 1-teens, low 120s that put him right in the mix with this field. Something happened at Del Mar last summer. I know some horses just don't handle that surface at Del Mar. I don't know if he started doing bad for some physical reason, but something obviously went wrong with this horse, and they gave him a lot of time off. Now they're coming back in a pretty ambitious spot. They're running this horse in the toughest race of his career off a long layoff, and that probably says to me that he's training well. And if he can get back to those speed figures that we saw last summer at this same race course, Santa Anita, he's a player in this race. I like the post position, and I'm not afraid of anybody else. So I'll take a big shot with him at like 15 or 20 to 1.
If there's one thing I've learned in this game, it is never knock someone picking a long shot, because it just doesn't make any sense. If you could make an argument for a long shot as you just did, go for it.
Yeah, that's good advice, because you don't want to miss out on those opportunities, because they can be few and far between. So you want to pick those up when they come along at the racetrack. That's everything for this week. Fun talking about these races, and we'll have a lot to recap on Tuesday's Pacecast show, because there'll be all these Derby preps to talk about along with these other stakes races that we mentioned. So we'll be back with the podcast on Tuesday. For now, remember, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts, just to make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel so you can get all of this content. Thanks for listening this week, guys. Good luck this weekend, and we'll talk again on Tuesday.